Can you believe some people just assume you're weak because you're quiet? Because you choose your battles, and you don't immediately react to every provocation? I swear, some people mistake patience for pushover, and in my case, that assumption led to a downfall so spectacular, so utterly poetic, it felt like a masterpiece I'd meticulously crafted. This isn't just a story about getting even, it's about watching someone dig their own grave with the very shovel they tried to bury you with. Tell me, would you have waited as long as I did, or would you have unleashed hell the moment he showed his true colors? It all started subtly, as these things often do. I'd just landed a new job at Sterling & Finch, a mid-sized marketing agency that, from the outside, looked like a beacon of creativity and collaboration. I was thrilled, fresh out of a challenging but ultimately unfulfilling role, and eager to prove myself. My direct manager, a man named Mark, seemed pleasant enough during the interviews, a bit boisterous maybe, but I chalked that up to enthusiasm. He was in his late 40s, always impeccably dressed, and had a way of commanding a room that initially I admired. My first few weeks were a blur of new systems, new faces, and the exciting hum of a busy office. I was assigned to a team working on a major account, one of the agency's biggest clients, and I felt a surge of pride. I put in long hours, absorbed everything I could, and tried to be as helpful and proactive as possible. I genuinely believed I was making a good impression. Then, the cracks started to show. It began with little things, so small I almost dismissed them. During team meetings, if I offered an idea, Mark would often nod vaguely, then minutes later, echo my suggestion but attribute it to someone else, or present it as his own slightly rephrased thought. At first, I thought it was an oversight, a busy mind forgetting the origin. But it kept happening. If I presented a preliminary report, he'd skim it, then later present it to the department head as if he'd conceptualized the entire framework. I tried to speak up once, very gently, saying, "Oh, that's actually what I was suggesting earlier, Mark, but you've articulated it perfectly." He just gave me a tight, dismissive smile and moved on, not even acknowledging my comment. The message was clear. My contributions were to be absorbed and repurposed, my voice secondary. It escalated. Mark started giving me the least desirable tasks, the grunt work that no one else wanted, even though my job description clearly stated a more strategic role. He'd overload me with menial research, then criticize me for not having enough time for my core responsibilities. He'd make subtle, cutting remarks about my lack of experience in front of colleagues, even though I had years of relevant work under my belt. He'd schedule important meetings knowing I had a prior commitment, then chastise me for my absence, making me look unprofessional to senior staff. It was a slow, insidious erosion of my confidence and standing. I felt like I was constantly swimming upstream, and every stroke was being undermined. I'd go home utterly drained, replaying conversations in my head, trying to pinpoint what I was doing wrong. Was I too quiet? Not assertive enough? Did I just rub him the wrong way? My partner, Sarah, saw the change in me. I was usually so vibrant, so excited about new opportunities, but this job was turning me into a shadow of myself. She urged me to confront him, to go to HR, but something held me back. I knew Mark was well liked by senior management, charming and gregarious, and I was just the new person. I feared sounding like I was complaining, or worse, that I'd be labeled difficult and jeopardize my position entirely. The real turning point, the moment I knew this wasn't just a personality clash but a deliberate campaign, came during a pitch for a new client. This was a massive opportunity for the agency, and the stakes were incredibly high. I had poured my heart and soul into the research and initial strategy for this pitch, working late nights, fueled by caffeine and a desperate need to prove myself. My section of the presentation was critical, outlining the core creative concept. I'd practiced it endlessly, anticipating every possible question. The morning of the pitch, I arrived early, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. Mark, however, had other plans. Just before we were called in, he pulled me aside, a faux sympathetic look on his face. "Listen, I know you've worked hard on this," he began, "but I think it's better if I handle your segment. Your delivery can be a bit soft. We need to project absolute confidence with this client. Don't worry, I'll credit you for the concepts." My stomach dropped. I tried to argue, to explain how much effort I'd put in, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave. "It's for the good of the team, for the agency. Don't make this difficult." I was speechless, fuming, but also paralyzed by fear. With minutes to go, what could I do? I watched, seething, as he presented my ideas, my concepts, my hard work, with his characteristic swagger, taking all the credit. He even embellished a few points, making it seem like his own genius. The client loved it. We won the account. Mark was hailed as a hero. I was invisible. That night, I went home and cried. I felt completely defeated, humiliated. Sarah held me, listened patiently as I recounted the day's events, and then looked at me with a steely resolve I hadn't seen before. "You can't let him do this to you," she said. "You're too good, too smart. You need a plan." And that's when it clicked. Confrontation wouldn't work. Going to HR would be a risk. What I needed was not a battle, but a strategy. I needed to play the long game. I decided then and there that Mark thought I was weak, a pushover who would eventually burn out and quit. He saw my quiet nature as timidity, my patience as inability to fight back. He was wrong. I was patient because I was observing. I was quiet because I was listening. I was waiting because I was planning. I began to document everything. Every snide remark, every stolen idea, every instance of sabotage. I kept a meticulous, detailed log, noting dates, times, specific incidents, and any witnesses. I started sending myself emails summarizing my contributions to projects, always carbon copying relevant team members where appropriate, creating a digital trail of my work. I learned to speak up, but not aggressively. Instead of saying, "That was my idea," I'd interject with, "Building on the concept I presented earlier, we could also consider." Forcing the connection without being overtly confrontational. I started subtly offering to help other team members, especially those on Mark's periphery, knowing that goodwill and a reputation for being helpful would only benefit me in the long run. I made myself indispensable to the actual work, even as Mark tried to relegate me. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was being systematically undermined, my professional life becoming a misery, and my options seemed limited. But I knew I couldn't just walk away, not after everything I'd invested. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted him directly, gone to HR, or tried to build your own quiet case like I was attempting? I'm genuinely curious about your take. My meticulous planning wasn't just about documenting Mark's transgressions. It was also about understanding the power dynamics of the agency, the unspoken rules, and most importantly, Mark's weaknesses. His biggest flaw, I realized, was his inflated ego and his tendency to cut corners when he thought he could get away with it. He was brilliant at the high-level presentation, at charming clients, but he was surprisingly sloppy with details, often relying on others, read me, to pick up his slack. He also had a habit of overpromising to clients, committing to deliverables that were incredibly challenging, if not impossible, to achieve within the given timelines, all to make himself look good in the moment. This, I knew, was a ticking time bomb. My job was to make sure I wasn't caught in the blast, and ideally to be the one to light the fuse. The opportunity finally presented itself with the very client account Mark had stolen credit for winning. It was a massive digital marketing campaign, encompassing social media, SEO, content creation, and an interactive web experience. Mark had, in his usual flamboyant style, promised the client a groundbreaking, never-before-seen interactive element for their website, something far beyond the agency's current capabilities and budget. I knew this because I was the one who had researched the feasibility, and my report had clearly stated it would require significant external development and a much larger budget than allocated. Mark, of course, had ignored my report, likely not even reading past the executive summary, and promised the moon. The deadline was looming, and the interactive element was nowhere near being realized. I watched, silently, as the panic slowly started to set in for the rest of the team, though Mark continued to project an air of calm, even as he privately barked orders at increasingly frantic developers. My strategy was simple: continue doing my job flawlessly, meet all my deadlines, and subtly highlight the growing discrepancy between Mark's promises and the team's capacity to deliver. When Mark would delegate a task related to the impossible interactive element, I would accept it, but always follow up with an email, carbon copying another team member or even a senior director, outlining the specific challenges and estimated timeframes, effectively creating a paper trail that showed my realistic assessment. For example, if he asked me to finalize the UX flow for the interactive platform by end of week, I'd reply, "Understood." Just to confirm, this timeline assumes we have the external development resources confirmed and integrated by Tuesday, as per our original assessment. Otherwise, we're looking at a 3-week delay for that specific component. I'll work on the UX wireframes based on current internal capabilities in the interim. I wasn't saying no, I was simply stating facts with witnesses. I was documenting his overreach, but in a way that made me look like a diligent, detail-oriented employee, not a complainer. Meanwhile, I quietly cultivated relationships with key people outside of Mark's direct influence, particularly with Maria, one of the most respected senior project managers, and David, the head of the creative department. I'd offer to help them with small tasks, provide insights, or just engage in friendly conversation. I made sure they saw my work, my dedication, and my collaborative spirit, contrasting sharply with Mark's increasingly isolated and demanding behavior. I made sure they knew I was a team player, someone who delivered. The inevitable crunch came. 2 weeks before the final client presentation, the interactive web experience was a disaster. It was buggy, incomplete, and nowhere near what Mark had promised. The client was starting to ask pointed questions, and the atmosphere in the office was thick with tension. Mark, ever the master of deflection, started subtly shifting the blame. He'd say things like, "If we had better foresight from the planning stage," or "Some of the initial assessments were a bit optimistic," knowing full well that my assessments had been realistic. He even tried to suggest that my initial UX wireframes had been the cause of some of the development delays, a blatant lie. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I had built my case, meticulously, over months. I had the documentation, emails, meeting notes, my initial feasibility reports that clearly outlined the challenges, all time-stamped and stored securely. I had the witnesses, the developers who knew the interactive element was a pipe dream, the team members who had seen Mark claim my ideas, and the senior staff who had started to notice Mark's increasing defensiveness and the growing problems with the client account. I scheduled a meeting with Sarah, the head of HR, and Michael, a senior partner in the agency, ostensibly to discuss career development and project challenges. This was my Trojan horse. I walked into that meeting, not with a complaint, but with a portfolio. I laid out my case calmly, factually. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I simply presented the evidence. I showed them my initial report on the interactive element, clearly stating the required resources and budget, dated months ago, predating Mark's grand promises. I showed them emails where Mark had taken credit for my work, and follow-up emails where I had gently re-established my authorship. I showed them my performance reviews, which were consistently excellent, contrasting sharply with Mark's recent attempts to subtly discredit me. I even included a detailed analysis of how Mark's overpromising on the client account was now jeopardizing not just that project, but potentially the agency's relationship with a major client. Sarah and Michael listened intently, their expressions shifting from neutral to concerned, then to grim. They asked questions, and I answered them with precision and supporting documentation. I didn't say, "Mark is a terrible person." I said, "These are the facts, this is the impact on my work, and this is the risk to the agency." I explained that I loved working for Sterling and Finch, that I was passionate about my job, but that the environment created by Mark was making it unsustainable for me to contribute effectively, and was directly impacting project delivery. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. When I finished, Michael looked at me, then at Sarah, and simply said, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will be looking into this immediately." I walked out of that room feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilarating relief. The burden I had carried for months felt lighter. I had trusted my instincts, I had been patient, and I had played my hand. The next few days were a blur of hushed conversations and urgent meetings behind closed doors. Mark, oblivious to the extent of my meticulously built case, continued his usual bluster, but I could see a subtle shift in how people reacted to him. The polite smiles were a little tighter, the nods a little less enthusiastic. Then, the inevitable. A new agency-wide email was sent out, announcing a restructuring of the client services department, effective immediately. Mark, it stated, was moving on to pursue other opportunities. There was no fanfare, no farewell lunch, just a clinical, impersonal announcement. My heart gave a small leap. It wasn't just about him leaving, it was about the vindication, the proof that my quiet persistence had worked. I wasn't just a victim, I had orchestrated my own justice. The aftermath was surprisingly swift and effective. Mark was gone, and I was temporarily assigned to oversee the problematic client account, tasked with damage control and getting the interactive element back on track with a realistic scope and budget. It was a huge challenge, but a challenge I relished. I finally had the authority to implement the solutions I had proposed months ago, and with the support of senior management, we managed to salvage the client relationship and deliver a solid, albeit slightly scaled-back campaign. My quiet work and proven ability to deliver under pressure earned me respect and trust. Within a few months, I was promoted to a senior project manager, overseeing my own team and, ironically, many of the strategic initiatives Mark had once claimed as his own domain. I made sure my team felt heard, valued, and credited for their contributions. I vowed to never let anyone feel the way Mark had made me feel. Looking back, the whole experience was a painful lesson, but also a profound one. Mark thought I was weak, I was patient. He thought I would break, I was building. His downfall was, indeed, my masterpiece, not because I reveled in his misfortune, but because it was a testament to the power of strategic thinking, resilience, and unwavering self-belief. It taught me that sometimes, the loudest voices aren't the strongest, and that true power lies not in bluster, but in the quiet, methodical execution of a well-laid plan. Like this video if you were on my side, and subscribe for more stories like this. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. What's the biggest lesson you took from my story? I'll see you all in the next story.